You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
Hello and welcome. This is another podcast from seakayakroutes.com, and I'm Simon Willis. But as you can probably hear, this one's a little bit different. I'm heading for a history lesson. Duncan Winning is the honorary president of the Scottish Canoe Association and was awarded the OBE for services to kayaking. The designs he drew set out the blueprint for almost all of today's modern sea kayaks. I'm going to ask him how that came about. Once I meet him, that is. I'm heading for the industrial archive where Duncan works. It's in Johnson, which is just outside Glasgow. The first thing I'm going to ask him is how he started kayaking.
Well, it started simply because in the late 1940s, two local lads, Joe Reid and Davy Logan, they were already doing canoe touring. You know, like so they'd paddle from Gourock down the Clyde round the Mulligantyre, things like that. And Dave occasionally would take the kids out in his canoe for just a spin round the bay. But his boat was a huge thing compared to modern boats. 17 foot long wasn't that big, but it was about 30 inches wide, and it carried the beam for a long way. Had a big open cockpit pointed at both ends, about 6 foot long. You could lie down and sleep in it. And so my first canoeing, if you like, was that, around the bay. Then my pal was...
How old were you?
At that point, probably under 10 anyway. But my pal was bought a small canoe by his father for doing fairly well in his 11 plus exam. So I was about a year younger than him, and we used to go out in this thing about 11 foot long, two of us. So we just went out paddling from in the Firth of Clyde where I stayed.
Was it thought of as a sport pastime in that time, where people classed themselves as canoeists, or was it just something you did as well as hill walking and kicking a football around?
Well, at that time, bear in mind, I wasn't involved with the canoe clubs, but there were canoe clubs in existence. Mind you, in the whole of Scotland, there was maybe about three. There'd be the Fourth Canoe Club, the Tay Canoe Club, who are mainly river people, Scottish Hostlers Canoe Club, and then the Irvine Canoe Club came along. But the two fellas I talked about, Davy Logan and Joe Reid, they, in actual fact, they were building an odd canoe for sale to other members of the Hustlers Canoe Club, and I used to sort of go along to the shed and watch them building them. So when I was 13, I designed my first canoe, and I built it when I was 14. I've never been without a canoe in my own design since.
How did you know where to start? Just
did it. Some people are good at some things, and I seem to have a flair for that.
Mm-hmm. Did that set the course of your career?
Well, when you say career, my canoeing interest, yes. I mean, my career was marine engineering, but that was quite a different field altogether.
Well, hang on a second. No, designing your own canoe to put on the sea and marine engineering is not that far apart. Oh, it doesn't sound that far apart to me.
Marine engineering that I'm talking about is diesel engines with a bore of about a metre in diameter. It's quite different, and that is all done. Although I wasn't involved in design calculations, but the design of canoes is very much, in my sense anyway, it's very much an eyeball thing. It's not a calculation of prismatic coefficients and all that kind of thing and curve of areas. I've done that of late, but that's merely to check out what I've drawn as an actual fact will work.
But it's the drawings that you've become quite well known for, because you've got hold of you've got hold of the boats and drawn them now. Could you explain that? I mean, how that began and whose designs it were, whose boats it were you were actually recording.
Well, that's basically very simple, because I was designing my own boats and using them. As you used a boat, you noted deficiencies. You had a mental note of what you would change for the next boat. And that's how it went on till I was about 19. I was on to about my fourth generation of seaboat by that time. And then a fellow club member brought back a sealskin kayak from Greenland, Ken Taylor. And he brought it to Loch Lomond, and I was one of the ones that had a shot in it. And I was so impressed with it. It was so much better than what I had designed that I based my designs on that ever since. So that's really the only one. When I say copied, that kayak came into the care of Joe Reid and myself, and we carefully measured it up. And that's the one boat that I drew from, if you like, from someone else's background. And that was simply recording the shape of this beautiful West Greenland kayak. And I've given that drawing freely to lots of people in the canoeing world, one of whom was a bloke called Jeff Blackford, who was head of canoeing at the Calshot Activities Centre in the Solent. He couldn't find a design for a canoe that suited him, and he built a plywood canoe, which was basically Ken Taylor's kayak, stretched by I think about 10.5 inches. The ends altered to suit plywood construction, and the deck and cockpit made suitable for a European paddler, and he called it the Anis Acuta. And then shortly after that, Frank Goodman took it aboard and produced it commercially for Valley Canoe Products. So that introduced Valley Canoe Products to sea canoeing. Previously, they had been mainly involved with producing river canoes. So I've got a lot of collections of other people's drawings, but the one that I, if you like, copied was the shape of this West Greenland kayak. And my subsequent designs, although if you look at them, you admit that the similarity isn't necessarily obvious. That has been a great influence, and that kayak drawing has spawned something like in excess of 50 different designs, from Britain to North America to Australia and New Zealand.
Give me a sense of how that changed the look of kayaks from the way they looked previously to subsequently.
Well, if you look at the designs that were in use here, shall we say, go back to immediately pre-war. The designs were very much influenced by the German folding canoes. And although they were, you could call loosely kayaks, the ones that were imported into this country didn't bear any real sort of resemblance to Inuit boats. And you have to remember that Inuit kayaks are vary tremendously, from boats as small as 10 foot long up to boats nearly 30 foot long, from 16 inches wide or less even, up to nearly 3 feet wide. The ones that we tend to be influenced by most in this country are the Greenland kayaks, simply because we've come into contact with them more. But after the war, the boats that were built in this country, whether you're talking about commercially built boats or designs, the likes of Percy Blandford's boats, were more based on the type of shape that came from the German folders. They were all fairly beamy, fairly deep. But there are a number of different paths have led to our designs at the moment. For instance, there was a canoe called the Sea Rapier, which was a glass fibre version of a Norwegian design by a bloke called Hole. It was designed originally in 1940, and that proved a very good sea boat. Had a lot of sheer. It was longer than what we were used to, narrower, more towards the proportions of what we've got now, but certainly a bit different looking. Derek Hutchison appeared in the scene. His first boat was a PBK, but then he became involved in sea paddling, and a lot of the paddlers on the North East Coast were using canvas-covered Tyne Greenland kayaks. And I don't know for sure, but I'm very, very confident that Tyne Greenland kayak is basically simply a particular West Greenland kayak that's been measured up and reproduced using different building techniques.
We're talking similar to the Ken Taylor relay thing that went down to the valley.
Yes. The Tyne Greenland is. There was plans sold for that, and it was the design which was used by the BC Rolling Circus. So Derek was involved with these people. Derek also paddled one of these glass fibre Sea Rapiers. Then Derek started building boats on his own. And from what he's told me, he was very much influenced by the design of, I think it was the Mackenzie Delta kayak, the upturned ends. And of course, Frank Goodman came into the sea canoeing or kayaking, as it's known now, with the Anis Acuta. And of course, his designs downstream, you can see there's a certain family resemblance. The profile tends to have the sheer, the slightly upturned end. But of course, you've got lots of people have come into the market since then. But then they've been influenced by what's available. But I would suggest that the biggest single influence in the modern kayak design as far as the United Kingdom is concerned. And I have to say I'm very biased in this, of course I am, but I think it was Ken Taylor's Eskimo kayak.
And it was nice to go back, presumably, when you went back a couple of years ago with Gordon Brown, to go back with that design and see how things had changed.
Very much so. Of course, that was the whole idea of the exercise. I was fortunate in getting a Winston Churchill Fellowship to enable me to make a pilgrimage in company with Gordon back to Iglorisut, where the original kayak had come from, and to see what design changes had happened in kayaks since then, and also to look at Inuit paddles. Yes, that was a fantastic opportunity, fantastic.
I saw your slideshow 2 years ago at the symposium, and I was just interested for you to recount what was it like when you took that drawing that you'd made to them and you'd shown them, and what did they make of it?
Well, it caused quite a bit of interest in the school, with the school teacher at Iglorisut. But the Greenlanders are very, very laid-back people, and the original builder, Emmanuel Corneliusson, two of his sons were still alive, but they were sort of very matter-of-fact about it. But the people in the different Greenland museums that we were in, one in Ilulissat and one in Nuuk, they were very interested and very keen to get copies of the drawing. There is a revival in interest in kayaking in Greenland, not from a seal hunting point of view, but it's very much tied into their cultural identity. So, and it depends very much where you are. In the year that we were there, the Greenland National Championships was in the south of the country at Qaqortoq, but in Umanak Fjord there was no representatives from Umanak Fjord at it. They simply couldn't afford the transport costs to get their kayaks away down to the south of the country, because transport is very expensive.
The rain really is coming down hard now on the roof here of this warehouse that we're in. But just tell me, did the Greenlanders have a history of writing things down, of drawing their designs? And if not, I'm intrigued as to what they made of it when they actually saw what was a version of their design written down.
Well, no, they work in a totally different system. I mean, they don't traditionally, they don't work with a rule, whether it's metric or imperial. Everything is made to suit the individual. The length of the boat is so many times the height of the person. The width is the width of their hips, and depending on how skilled they are, 1, 2, 3 or 4 knuckles aside over and above your hip width. So, but they're not very emotive if you show them a drawing or whatnot. The nearest I can get to that was that
excuse me, there's an aircraft just landed in here.
It's a ventilation fan.
Right.
If you want to go through there, we'll shut the door.
Well, we've come into the office because it was getting rather loud in the warehouse. Now, the Greenlanders presumably didn't write too much down, so what did they make of it when you presented them with drawings of how their kayaks used to be?
Well, they're very laid back, and they didn't really show much emotion other than the people in the museums at Nuuk and Ilulissat, they were very pleased to get copies of the drawings. But back in Iglorisut, no one really kayaks anymore. So it didn't really produce much of a reaction as far as that went, but I was able to get a lot of information because the local school teacher was able to translate for us. No great reaction to the kayaking at all, really. Perhaps the exception to that is going back another couple of years beyond the trip to Greenland. I met up with the young Greenland kayak champion down in Wales. He had come over to a symposium run by Nigel Dennis, and I went down specifically to see him at a friend's house down there. Because John Heath in Texas was a friend of mine, I was immediately acceptable to Maligia. John had been a great friend to him, and had some photographs with me taken of a plywood kayak I'd built for a friend that was based on Ken Taylor's original kayak, and it was almost exactly the same size, but a very modern kayak with a plywood hull, plywood deck, contour deck, and the 3-hatch system. And when Maligia was having a look at this, he was in a different room from me, and he suddenly came through to the room, and he looked at this, and he said, "Did you build this?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Wow." And he was a carpenter, so that is the sort of most of expression I've had from them. I was quite happy that the Greenland rolling champion was impressed with the job.
Do they ever write anything down? Do they ever do dimensions in terms of, I don't know, feet or meters?
I don't know. I don't know what they do nowadays. But no, they would have. It's a totally different culture, because I say everything was it was in the mind as far as the proportions, but each boat was built to fit an individual. So it's the same with the paddles. Your paddles would be an arm span, or if it was a storm paddle, it would be half an arm span plus the length up to a certain number of knuckles, etc. Everything was done in relation to the individual that was going to use it, and that would be the same for all the hunting equipment. An igloo would be built to, if you were in that part of the world that used one, it would be built simply big enough to accommodate the number of people that went into it. They didn't work with a measurement system. Totally different. I don't think, particularly if you go way back, they wrote their history down, but then having an oral history is not exactly sort of uncommon. It was common to the Celtic peoples of Scotland. They didn't tend to write things down. It was all oral. Obviously, in modern days, the Greenlanders are like everyone else. I mean, if you go to a town in Greenland now, there's lots of modern, very stylish buildings. If you look at the teenagers, the only difference between the teenagers there and the ones here are that they've got a much greater variety of hair colour. They are bright green, bright red. They're as with it as anywhere. They've all got mobiles. They've all got their PCs. Communications in Greenland are difficult, so everyone does it by email. They're like everyone else now. They're up with what's going on in the world.
Coming back to the UK, what do you make of the current revival? Is it a revival in sea kayaking? It certainly seems to be getting very popular.
Oh, it certainly seems to be taking off. As I said earlier on, there was a great surge in sea kayaking when glass fibre production first came on, and it tied in with the education system and the coaching system and all that. I haven't really tried to analyse the present boom, because at my time in life I'm sort of becoming less involved in the coaching scheme. I'm just paddling nowadays. But canoeing itself has taken off in such numbers, and if you look at the south of the country, with their access problems, there's so many people trying to get onto a limited amount of water that there's a whole lot of sea out there. People have got more money in their pockets than they used to have. The transport for their boats is easier. There is also a factor in that there's a lot more designs available now for sea kayaks, and the plastic boats have brought the price down an awful lot, so they're much, much more available. And certainly there's a fantastic increase, there's no doubt about that. When I started, back in the 50s, most of the people that were involved in paddling in the hostelers were also involved in hill walking, climbing, skiing, because in those days canoeing tended to be a summer activity, and the skiing and the climbing were the winter activities, because you didn't have the range of ancillary equipment that you have now. You didn't have even jackets that were made especially for canoeists. I mean, you just tended to use in the top, the sort of top half of the sailors' wet weather gear, and otherwise you just wore what you stepped out the car with. So it was very much a summer activity. But there was also a number of people that took up canoeing who had been active climbers. I can think of one or two people that were in the mould of sort of Tom Weir, people that had climbed in the Himalayas, South America, all over the world, really experienced climbers. And as they get a little bit older, began to feel the effort of carrying the rucksack in the back just a bit much, and they could enjoy the same kind of outdoor activities in the canoe, but the canoe carried all their loads. So there was a few people, quite well-known people in the canoeing world, in the climbing world, that came into canoeing later in life.
I kind of wonder if that's sort of what's happening now, because it seems to be an influx is coming from a hill walking background, perhaps maybe because the Munros are so busy. Every time you go past a car park at the bottom of one, it's full. But in the intervening period, sea paddlers may have come from a river paddling background. And I just wonder if there's an echo now of how it was when you started paddling.
Possibly. I understand exactly what you mean about the Munro bagging and the number of people that you see by the side of the roads, the number of cars parked if you're going through Glencoe. And it's quite possible that there's a number of people that are taking up paddling to get away from the crowds in the hills. Quite possible, yes.
As someone who's looked at lots of designs, what do you make of the current designs that look less like the upturned bows that you see on the more traditional Greenland ones. What do you make of the others?
Well, I think in actual fact, not so many years ago, the distinctive features of the Greenland kayak were actually being exaggerated a bit. And some of the upturns were a bit more pronounced than what you would actually see in Greenland.
Oh, rather flamboyant flourishes, do you think?
Perhaps.
Design features.
Well, they look nice and all right in a sea. They perhaps kept the boat a bit drier. It certainly didn't dive as much. But also, if you didn't have a good cruising load and the boat was riding light, it certainly increased the windage an awful lot. Everything in canoe design, like most other things in life, is a compromise. So in actual fact, the boats I use myself now don't have quite as high ends as has been the practice in recent years, and it has the advantage that they're less susceptible to the wind.
Do you still build your own boats?
Yes and no. I'm still involved in building an odd plywood boat. But I tend to, like everyone else nowadays, I use a glass fibre boat. It has certain advantages, and I'm certainly not going to spend the hours and hours and hours of work that's required to build a fiberglass plug in a mould just for the sake of building one of my own design.
What do you paddle?
When I can paddle one of my own design anyway.
What boat do you paddle?
Variety at the moment, because I've got a boat which is suitable for expedition work, and I've got a boat that's suitable for day paddling.
And when you compare them to the older ones, what do you think? Have they got better?
In some respects, yes. One of the great advantages of the two boats I have now is their construction is very light. Now, all right, they'll not last as long as a heavier construction, but when you get to my age, lifting a kayak onto the roof rack is a consideration well worth taking into account.
Hey, it's a consideration for everyone. So in what ways are they inferior? Do they have anything less appealing about them than the older ones that you may have paddled?
The only inferior thing is that if you're building a boat for yourself, to fit yourself, you can do precisely that. It's actually made like a tailor-made suit. Everything is made to suit exactly you. Therefore, potentially you can make it that little bit more comfortable. But as far as the using of the boats, no, I say things have moved on. The only slight advantage in the older boats that I can think of immediately is you always had a floorboard in there, so your legs, if they come down to the bottom of the boat, were always in the dry. You never, any drips you took in with your feet ended up below the floorboards.
You can't convince the manufacturers to start putting floorboards in, can you, do you think?
Wouldn't even try.
That was Duncan Winning. Frankly, there is so much in that podcast. While I was editing, I was finding new things each time I listened. He admits he can talk for Scotland, but that's not a problem because Duncan has interesting things to say. You can find more podcasts in the podcast library of seakayakroots.com. I'm Simon Willis. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Find out how easy it is to subscribe to all our free programs. Visit our website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.